Forest Church quotes William Howard Taft in his book, The American Creed. Quote, "We speak with great satisfaction of the fact that our ancestors came to this country in order to establish freedom of religion." Well, if you're going to be exact, they came to this country to establish freedom of their religion and not the freedom of anybody else's religion. Church goes on to write, "It is certainly true that when the Pilgrims arrived on the shores of New England, they sought religious freedom from one established religion with the stated intention of establishing a new one. Yet the logic that informed their own liberation led directly, if unintentionally, to the establishment of freedom for others. Adam and Eve lost their freedom by exercising it. The Pilgrims and Puritans spread theirs by doing the same. It is no exaggeration to say that America's cornerstone is religious liberty."
As Bob mentioned, we recently took a trip to West Virginia to see some of that part of the country, almost heaven. We drove through the valleys, along the rivers and the railroad tracks. It was the sensible way to build roads and tracks, right? Rivers being relatively flat and all. This is the lowland. We also passed countless coal mines, each with its own clearly marked ambulance entrance. We were in the heart of Appalachia. Most homes were trailers or prefabricated houses. Trash was piled up until a trip to the dump was possible, maybe. Abandoned vehicles were everywhere. I mean, how do you get rid of this stuff when you have no money to haul it away? If you've read Barbara Kingsolver's book, Demon Copperhead, this area of the country brought it to living color. That book was set in Appalachia and focused on the so-called systems of support and help. If there are systems in place in Appalachia, they aren't working very well, according to Kingsolver. The other thing we noted was the number of Christian churches. Every little place had a little church. Towns of no size had churches. They held their services on Wednesdays and Saturdays and some on Sundays. I could envision the itinerant traveling ministers who can't be in two places at once on Sunday, reaching their flocks wherever they could. And broadband is no way to go to a church. It's just not widespread. I had to wonder, what are they preaching in these churches? What message is giving them a sense of what is good and right and true? How is their religion addressing what was happening around them? What meaning was being made of their lives? There was sure no diversity of religion that we saw, not a mosque or a temple. I do know Charleston, West Virginia has a UU church, but not Panther Pass. This experience brought to mind two things that have been on my heart. The first is Christian nationalism and how it is gaining a greater foothold in our country right now. It is not new, but it is on steroids. For years, we've heard that we are a Christian nation. That idea is easily disputed. However, it was the only game in town in this part of the country. The second thing on my mind is Unitarian Universalism's value for pluralism. I can see what happens to our nation's values when pluralism is not present and even discouraged. I see what happens when there's only one game in town. Our nation is in danger when we do not respect pluralism or do not respect diversity of all kinds, including religious diversity. I don't know about you, But the things I keep hearing about the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which some in our incoming administration are all about, scares the stuff out of me. Now, I didn't read that whole thing. It is 900 pages. But commentary about it certainly argues that the project is largely based on Christian nationalism. Maura Casey, former New York Times editorial writer, wrote this about Project 2025 for the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. Heritage Foundation's president, Kevin Roberts, recently said, "We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be." Casey says he is not exaggerating. The plan is ambitious, Casey wrote. The mandate for leadership is both specific in detail and vengeful in tone. Its central agenda is to impose a form of Christian nationalism on the United States. Christian nationalism believes that the Christian Bible as God's infallible law should be the basis of government and have primacy over public and private institutions. Its patriarchal view does not recognize gender equality or gay rights and sanctions discrimination based on religious beliefs. Christian nationalist ideas are woven through the plans of Project 2025 and the pages of the mandate for leadership. Its thousands of recommendations include specific executive orders to be repealed or implemented. Laws, regulations, departments, and whole agencies would be abolished. It portrays anyone who opposes its sweeping ambitions as being enemies of our republic. Wow, enemies? We are in danger. I picked one thing out of Project 2025 this morning to focus on, and that is, quote, improve education by moving control and funding of education from DC bureaucrats directly to parents and state and local governments, unquote. I picked out education because it is the foundation of our future. It is how we inculcate values in forming minds. I worry that some local governments and parents don't really care about the separation of church and state or about the children who might not be Christian. Pluralism and separation of church and state are pretty abstract ideas, especially if you were raised without diversity or if you think your beliefs are the only way, and certainly the right way. When we were in West Virginia, we talked to a guy who helped us get our vehicle unstuck, long story there, and we asked him how the schools were. Pitiful, he said. But he said they supplement what their children were learning with Christian homeschooling. Nothing wrong with that. But schools of choice and vouchers, which are on the rise, are a sneaky way of squelching diversity and pluralism by taking kids out of public schools. Education and religion have been in a tug of war for years, but right now it looks like religion is winning, especially Christianity. For instance, in Oklahoma, the state has decided that every classroom must have a Bible in it. The Bibles must include the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, documents not found on any of the Bibles on my shelves. Ryan Walters, Oklahoma State School Superintendent, wants to spend $3 million in state funds for Bibles that fit certain criteria, including that the pages are supplemented with those U.S. historical materials. The Bibles must also be bound in leather or leather-like material for durability. The nonprofit news outlet Oklahoma Watch reported that the requirements match the God Bless the USA Bible that Trump urged his supporters to begin buying earlier this year on a website that sells the book for $59.99. But you see, Oklahoma goes further than purchasing Bibles just to sit around in classrooms or on library bookshelves for voluntary use. The Arkansas Democrat Gazelle reported that Oklahoma's top education official ordered public schools to incorporate the Bible into lessons for grades 5 through 12. According to the reporter, the directive drew immediate condemnation from civil rights groups and supporters of the separation of church and state, with some calling it an abuse of power and a violation of the U.S. Constitution. The order sent to districts across the state by Ryan Walters says adherence to the mandate is compulsory and immediate strict compliance is expected. He said the Bible is an indispensable historic and cultural touchstone. Without basic knowledge of it, Oklahoma students are unable to properly contextualize the foundation of our nation, which is why Oklahoma educational standards provide for its instruction. Now, I am not the best biblical scholar, but I don't remember anything in the Bible about the founding of the U.S. Fortunately, the request has been met with resistance by some of Oklahoma's largest school districts. More recently, Louisiana is now requiring the 10 Commandments be posted in every classroom. That has been blocked by a judge. Thank goodness for these acts of resistance, which are at risk under Project 2025. What happens when we have a lack of pluralism or a lack of religious diversity? What happens when a single religion is intimately tied to the state? I believe Christian nationalism is responsible for rising anti-Semitism, and confusingly, it builds support for a Zionist Israel. I have struggled to understand why the far right, Nazis included, can be both anti-Semitic and pro-Israel. A recent NPR story revealed that conservative Christians, and evangelicals especially, have been staunch supporters of Israel for decades, citing a religious connection to the Jewish people in the land. This support stems from the belief by some denominations that the end times prophecy will take place in Israel and that Israel is the rightful land for Jews, according to their interpretation of the Bible. I found another answer in the publication Jacobin, a socialist magazine. Lena Obermeyer argued in 2021 that the far right, Nazis included, supported Zionism because that ideology would move all the Jews to one place. She wrote, since the Jewish nationalist movement was born in Europe in the 19th century, a minority of European anti-Semites have championed Jewish settlements in Palestine. Indeed, one of the reasons British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour pushed for British government support of the Zionist movement in 1917 was to rid British soil of Jews. She wrote, when the European right fawns over Israel, it provides a kind of model for a Europe that is struggling to find consensus on how to deal with its own borders. Moreover, for many on the far right, there's a sense of solidarity with Israel, which is now imagined to share a Judeo-Christian heritage. Obermeyer continues, the contemporary wave of support for Israel among the European far right is first and foremost strategically motivated. The support deflects from the right's own racism and Islamophobia by channeling the cause of Europe's ultimate victims, the Jews, and it helps the right to cover up its own extensive track record of anti-Semitic rhetoric. So you see, the far right really is anti-Semitic and pro-Israel as a model of separation and exclusion. The documentary Israelism was created before the terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. The film describes the kind of rhetoric used in Israel to justify actions against the Palestinians. For example, the land that the Palestinians were living on was described as a wasteland, not unlike how early settlers in our country described what they found here to justify colonialism. I keep thinking Project 2025. The film depicts the myriad ways young Israelis have been indoctrinated into a pro-Israel fervor. It is more than ethnicity. It is argued as religion, They are taught that you cannot separate Judaism from Israel. That is Jewish nationalism. The movie rightly describes the historical trauma or the inherited trauma of the Holocaust and all the past history of Jews being persecuted through the ages. That history has led to violent conflict and war between Muslims and Jews that is steeped in power and hatred in the name of religion. These countries operate as theocracies. As our own nation leans more toward Christian nationalist, I worry about what will happen to our ability to live across our differences. Our nation's early history also dealt with pluralism and religious diversity. As the reading by Bob revealed, early European settlers were seeking religious liberty. And yes, they were Christians. But by its very nature, religious liberty does not make us a Christian nation. In Forrest Church's book, American Creed, from 1994, Church tells the story of Roger Williams and his strong stance on the separation of church and state. It was early on in our colonial history in the 1600s, as early as 1630. Williams, who lived in Massachusetts, defended a man who was punished for hunting on the Sabbath. This was a breach of Sabbath laws. Williams argued that a breach of the Ten Commandments should be sorted out by God, not by the government. Williams also spoke against the seizure of Indian lands without remuneration. I was happy to learn someone questioned that atrocity. Church wrote, Williams vigorously opposed oaths in court proceedings, such as "So help me God," and questioned the state's rights both to enforce religious uniformity and to collect taxes to support the clergy. Guess what? Williams was banished from Massachusetts. When he settled in Rhode Island, he established a civil government on the doctrine of the liberty of conscience, the equality of opinions before the law. Williams said people should not be persecuted because of their opinions or their religions. He would eliminate any laws that protect orthodoxy by statute. In other words, he would eliminate Christian nationalism. Williams argued that religion must have liberty because religion involves belief, not fact. Thus, if we use religion to prosecute the truth, we become persecutors of the truth. Forrest Church wrote, Williams' insistence on liberty of conscience with its corollary, tolerance toward those with unpopular opinions, is the keystone for all subsequent legislative protection of minority rights in America, whether religious, social, or political. Judges did not need to be Christian to make their decisions on the law. Williams said that laws can be enforced by moral non-Christians better than Christians who lack morality. I think we've seen that. Church wrote, to interpret and enforce public laws, a just-minded pagan possesses greater morality than a corrupt Christian. With Williams' innovation, a fundamental shift occurs. No longer is the colony and later the nation a Christian colony, for the government is no longer a Christian government. It was on these grounds that Roger Williams established the basis for American pluralism. Now, they weren't all like Roger Williams. Consider the oppressive Puritans. Church wrote, this remains the central paradox of our early history. Having fled to America in search of religious liberty, some of our forebears denied the same liberty to others, sometimes on pain of death. When we don't have pluralism, we have oppression and war based on religion or some other perceived difference. And so, my friends, I am grateful that Unitarian Universalists have boldly kept freedom of belief alive, first in our 7 principles and now in our 6 values. The 4th principle read, We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Our current statement on pluralism reads, we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Our founders were correct. Our nation was based on religious liberty. The current Christian nationalists are wrong. We were not formed as a Christian nation, but formed on religious liberty. Unitarian Universalism's important and necessary focus on pluralism helps us not only live together within a congregation of atheists, humanists, Christians, Jews, Muslims, pagans, it can help us bring peace to the communities that surround us. When we focus on what values hold us together, not what theological path we take to get there, we can honor diversity as a necessary part of a peaceful society. While we avoid forcing our beliefs on others, we must resist allowing others to use their religion to force their beliefs on society. I love the idea that it is up to us to seek the truth, that we are all sacred, and especially sacred in our diversity. I love that we want to be curious about one another in our respect, and that we can embrace our differences with love. When we deny pluralism, we get an other, and we get oppression. Let us consider and honor the idea that our support for pluralism might well guide us along a moral path of love and justice to mutual care and concern. Such values actually matter in a big way because we need to share space on this planet. Not only do we want to keep church and state separate, but we want to encourage and embrace the beautiful diversity that comes from pluralism. May it be so. May we make it so.